that there's no single lever that magically lifts productivity growth in the near term. But these are also reasons why it's important, I think, for governments to be working in a fairly methodical way from day one.
Welcome. Does the pickup in growth in the wage price index have negative implications for improving productivity?
Today's wage price index rise was probably a little at the higher end of expectations. I don't think it'll cause the Reserve Bank particular concern. It's broadly consistent with the expectations that they've had for the moderation in inflation over the last few months. It does serve as a reminder that wage pressures with a very strong labour market will always be there. And I think it shows that we're never fully out of the woods when it comes to inflation. But I don't think today's WPI will be causing too much angst.
As Productivity Commission Chair, you provided the Treasurer with 70 recommendations on how to get productivity moving 2 years ago. What more do you believe the Albanese government could already have achieved in this area?
Look, I think the government has made a number of very positive steps in its first term. A change that, for example, the E61 Institute, which I lead, championed was the removal of non-compete agreements from employment contracts. That's been announced in the most recent budget. And I think the government's made some steady steps in re-energising the old national competition policy framework with the states, potentially putting payments on the table to try and reward states for doing pro-productivity reform. So I think a lot of the architecture is there, but I think this second term certainly does provide the government with a pretty good platform to pursue a number of these areas in the name of achieving higher productivity growth.
Did the Treasurer need to commission further reports from the Productivity Commission, which aren't likely to be presented to government until at least the third quarter this year?
Look, I would never begrudge a government from commissioning the Productivity Commission to provide advice. I think that's an excellent step. I think the Productivity Commission will provide very strong advice. I think in many ways the 5 pillars on which the Treasurer has asked for advice from the Productivity Commission flow pretty well from the Advancing Prosperity report in areas like having a more adaptive and skilled economy, the digital and data bit of improving technological uptake, the green transition, the transition to net zero and the care economy. All of those things are things which we explored, but which I think the Productivity Commission is very well positioned to provide more detail and a number of practical ways forward.
Jim Chalmers says the government needs at least 2 terms to lift productivity growth. Is long, stable government over multiple terms required to engage Australians in conversation over some of the bigger reforms that are being talked about?
I think these things do take time. I mean, productivity is something that occurs over a long period of time, and there can be a bit of fluctuations in the near term, but basically these are long-term policies that yield longer-term dividends. So I agree that these things do take time. I also agree that there's no single lever that magically lifts productivity growth in the near term. But these are also reasons why it's important, I think, for governments to be working in a fairly methodical way from day one. I should say too that it's not always about government. We have a tendency in the debate to talk as though this is something that government does and government pulls a policy lever and it results in higher or lower productivity growth. Overwhelmingly, productivity is determined by the decisions made out there in the private sector about the adoption of technology, trying new business models, the decision to start a new firm, anything that goes to innovation, to research and development. So it's the sum total of a lot of decisions made by private sector firms and managers and the efforts of employees out there.
Just on that point, Microsoft is investing billions in artificial intelligence projects. Overnight, it announced it'll lay off 6,000 workers. Is it another sign that for many, improving productivity will come at the expense of jobs?
I'm much more optimistic than that. I think in the past, often productivity improvement has taken the form of replacing labour with capital. That was certainly the experience in some of our big industries in the past, like agriculture or manufacturing or mining. And that happened over a gradual period, but certainly a lot fewer people are now employed in those sectors than was once the case. I think as we look forward, with so many people employed in the care economy, in the non-market sector, so in areas like health and in education, I think it's much more likely that the advent of technology is something which complements, which augments human input, not necessarily which replaces it wholesale. So you can imagine, for example, AI providing support to a teacher or a lawyer or an accountant, not necessarily replacing them altogether, but freeing them up to do the bit that is the true human value add that comes over the top.
Now, just finally, the Productivity Commission under current Chair Danielle Wood presented government with a report into housing construction productivity earlier this year. What sort of gains could be made by just tackling this one issue, widely acknowledged as one of Australia's most pressing problems?
I think the stakes are particularly high for Australia in relation to construction, remembering that we are and have been a high population growth country. We have a high immigration intake. And for that reason, our construction sector is larger as a share of the economy than it is in other OECD countries. So to the extent that there's slow productivity growth in the construction sector, that hurts Australia in a way more so than it does other developed economies. So I think the focus on construction is absolutely right. I think the dividends are very significant, both in terms of our ability to accommodate a large and growing population, but also improving home ownership and affordability for young Australians.
Mr Brennan, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirsten.